good evening. First this evening, we are witnessing frightening scenes play out across the world and here in Australia right now as leaders cower to pro-Hamas protesters. It should worry all of us that this is occurring in the West. Universities have been allowed to become mouthpieces for terror and propaganda as anti-Semitism chips away at the very fibres that make this country great. Hamas are heroes for a new world, she says. Unprecedented. So what are students at these encampments across the world actually protesting for? What is their cause? Well, Students for Palestine at the University of Queensland asked their fellow comrades just that.
Why are you at the Gaza Solidarity Camp today?
Oh, yeah. Well, I mean, like I saw like stuff like happening in America, like student encampment, like all across America on university campuses, and like those students are incredibly brave. So I think it's like as a UQ student, like it's important to come out when our campus does like stand in solidarity with them.
In other words, she has no idea why she is there or what she's supposedly fighting for. Well, she and others should learn pretty quickly. And I would implore these so-called freedom fighters to watch a documentary called Screams Before Silence. Last night, it screened for the first time in Sydney, exposing the gender-based violence perpetrated by Hamas on October 7th. It's a harrowing watch and it's uncomfortable. Here is a small part of the trailer and a warning: some viewers may find this distressing.
There were 10 men around me. My instinct was just to fight, to do what I can. I was really scared that they're gonna rape me there and that they're gonna drag me through Gaza streets and parade my body around. I feared that more than being killed. I was chained for 3 weeks in Gaza. I was kept in a really dark room without being able to move. His name was Muhammad. He untied me. I knew that he's up to something. I knew that something bad is gonna happen.
And you can watch the full, confronting documentary online. But what it shows is how Hamas used sexual violence as a tool of war. It is truly unfathomable. Yet, where is the Me Too movement? The usual suspects who call themselves so-called champions of women. They're nowhere. Instead, we have a situation where encampments are taking over university campuses across the country, protesting against Israel, turning a blind eye to those October 7 atrocities as if they never happened. How do we get to a point in Australia in 2024 where Jewish students are scared to go to university out of fear of being attacked? This is a blight on society. And every day that goes by, it gets worse. There are reports the Australian National University is investigating allegations of a Nazi salute being performed on campus and death threats aimed at Jewish students. Just days after ANU encampment organiser Beatrice Tucker and Student Association Education Officer Luke Harrison made this frightening admission.
But surely, if you're going to protest against that, you've also got to send a message to Hamas to release the hostages, don't you?
Well, I actually say that Hamas deserve our unconditional support, not because I agree with their strategy.
You can't condemn what Hamas did in October last year?
I will not condemn what Hamas did. We must be unconditional, but we must be critical also,
Luke?
right?
Giving Hamas their unconditional support, therefore justifying murder, justifying rape, torture, justifying taking innocent people hostage, as Hamas did on October 7. The scenes at universities are so intimidating, parts of the University of Queensland went into lockdown yesterday after pro-Palestine protesters stormed two of its main buildings. The group descended on the offices of Vice-Chancellor Deborah Terry, demanding she front them to discuss the university's ties to companies which they claim have ties to Israel's invasion of Gaza.
My favourite part of the encampment so far might actually have to be today, when we protested and we brought our protest all the way to the Vice-Chancellor's building. They had plenty of security guards, they barricaded it all off, but they weren't able to stop us from getting in.
Yeah, it's all fun. At the same time, UQ protesters flew the flag of internationally recognised terrorist organisation Popular Front for the Liberation of Palestine. Yet the university says no punishment will be handed to those who hung the flag. Can you believe this is Australia? Imagine being a Jewish student fronting up on campus every day to learn and being confronted with this repulsive nonsense. And even if you're not a Jew, this is unacceptable. Police are investigating unlawful conduct at Sydney University after protesters entered buildings and harassed staff. Yet Sydney University Vice-Chancellor Mark Scott told the Sydney Morning Herald about the protests. That's part of who we are. Our instinct is never to preemptively shut down free speech and debate and the right to protest. Well, is hatred and division seriously part of who you are? Completely devoid of reality? The moral standards of our universities are out the window. And this is happening as encampments descend into chaos in the United States, forcing police to move in.
Fireworks, fury, and fear.
Oh my God!
These are the biggest protests at American universities for half a century. And this week they've got much bigger and much more violent.
Where are the cops?
When the police did finally arrive, they tried to control the chaos. Piercing the noise was a quiet act of defiance.
Columbia University protesters were so brazen, they even took down the American flag from campus grounds and replaced it with the Palestinian one. And you'll see at the end of this video, New York City police stood up for America and put the US flag back where it belongs. The stunt by protesters prompted local Mayor Eric Adams to offer up this stunning rebuke.
Don't take over our buildings and put another flag up. That may be fine to other people, but it's not to me. My uncle died defending this country, and these men and women put their lives on the line. And it's despicable that schools will allow another country flag to fly in our country. So blame me for being proud to be an American.
Spot on. And Australian politicians and university leaders could learn a lot from Eric Adams. And this is all happening under Anthony Albanese's watch. And yet, where is he? Why has he not called this out? Grow a spine and stand up to this madness. And where is Education Minister Jason Clare? Oh, he was out today talking about what keeps him up at night. Social media. That's his priority today. Meanwhile, universities are spiralling out of control.
But somehow, the governments and even the response of the police, I think, has been weak on these campuses as well. And as for the universities and some of the chancellors and vice-chancellors, they've got to look in the mirror themselves as well, because we can't be tolerating the vilification of any part of our community.
It's becoming clearer every day that history is repeating itself. Who would have thought we would be here in 2024, where Jewish people have become marginalised? We must protect our values in this country, which are right now being tested like never before. Also tonight, more mess for Labor as yet another former immigration detainee accused of breaching his visa conditions will have the latest from court shortly. And Queensland Premier's pre-election cash splash, his new plan to give almost everyone free electricity. So who foots the bill. And before we go to our panel, we'll take you now to some live pictures coming into us from UCLA in Los Angeles, where it's just gone 3 a.m. and police are still in a standoff with protesters. Police having to stand arm in arm, right? Police called in a standoff with these protesters. We know that they have descended into chaos at multiple universities across the US. So another tense night in Los Angeles. We will be bringing you those throughout the evening and keep you up to date with any of the latest information. But right now, let's bring in my panel, Perth Lord Mayor Basil Zempilas and National Senator Matt Canavan. Hi to you both. Thank you so much for joining us this evening. Basil, we'll start with you. I mean, as we've just said, universities are spiralling into chaos in the US, but also now we're seeing a lot of problems across the country. Where is the leadership? Why are Labor and the universities, for that matter, allowing this to continue?
We know that universities have often been a hotbed for free thought. We understand that. We accept that. Largely, we encourage it. But there needs to be some balance and there needs to be some leaders, whether it's amongst the university cohort themselves, whether it's the staff of the universities or some senior figures in public life saying, hang on a minute, hang on, guys. All right, we understand there's going to be some support for the Palestinians, but where is the counter support for the Israelis? And what you'd really like to do is you'd like to get the video, the documentary, which is freely available, as you said, Danica, you'd like to take that into the universities around the country and say, before you go out and protest, on the off chance you don't actually know what it is you're protesting about, how about you just have a look at this documentary? Have a look at that, let that sink in, and then see if you want to go and protest the way that you're carrying on at the moment. And the sooner they get that in front of people, the better.
Spot on, Basil, and I would implore people to look at it. It is very confronting, but it really gives you an idea of what so many went through on October 7. It is appalling. Matt, it is extraordinary that here in Australia in 2024, we have a situation where Jewish students are scared to go to university. How did we get here?
Well, look, in part, it's not all the Prime Minister's fault, of course, but in part there has been a vacuum created here by the Australian Prime Minister, who hasn't taken a leadership role on this issue. I mean, we need to be very clear about what we stand for as a country. Of course, we stand against the kind of atrocious violence we saw perpetuated by Hamas on October the 7th. We stand against any forms of anti-Semitism or racist conduct by any groups in our country. And of course, we also do defend the right to people to have their own say and their own views on this matter. So I have no problem defending the rights of students putting forward a view about how the war is being conducted by Israel, about the situation in Gaza. They're right within their rights to do that. What they don't have a right to do is to interfere with other students going about their day. They don't have a right to occupy buildings that would also interfere in those studies, and they certainly don't have a right to just camp on public universities' grounds. So those laws should be enforced by police and a leadership by the Prime Minister. And yes, also the universities have got to get tough here. I mean, if students are doing this, why don't they just get expelled? I mean, that's it. We're paying for most of these students' education. They get paid massive subsidies through the HECS help scheme and government subsidies on top of that. If they're going to flout the rules of the university, that support should be pulled.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's fair enough too. Now, let's move on because it's been revealed the released immigration detainee accused of bashing a grandmother during a violent home invasion had been sentenced to 8 years behind bars for serious drug offences, yet he was somehow still allowed to remove his ankle bracelet, a decision made by the Community Protection Board. Now, the Prime Minister is dodging and weaving again. This was him today.
Have they failed in this instance?
Well, the Community Protection Board is, of course, a board that's independent of politicians.
But have they failed?
Well, I can't. It's not appropriate for me to comment on individual cases.
Basil, Andrew Giles and Claire O'Neill are still nowhere on this issue and they're refusing to take any responsibility.
They can't be found, no answers from them, and then given the opportunity to say something strong, be a bit positive, perhaps even admit that they haven't quite got it right, the Prime Minister decides to deflect, as we just heard, and not answer what is a simple question. Not for me to give the Prime Minister advice, but I might just give him a little bit. Every now and then, it doesn't hurt to say, you know what, we got this wrong. This situation is unacceptable. We haven't been able to keep tabs on everybody. We weren't able to move quickly enough after the High Court ruling last November. We're working to get it right. We're doing everything we can. And here's what it is that we're doing. But when they duck and dive and dodge and don't front up, what are we supposed to think? It's been an absolute calamity, and a grandmother where I live, in this city, in this state, has copped the absolute pounding that we've seen allegedly by one of these people. It is simply not good enough, and the Prime Minister and his team should be speaking up more ferociously against what has taken place.
Absolutely, and we are going to cross live to Perth shortly, where another detainee has been charged for allegedly breaching his visa orders. But Matt, this is a mess. How will Labor get this under control?
Well, I've got to take responsibility in the first instance. I mean, what you saw there from the Prime Minister was a clear contravention of the old sign on President Freddie Truman's desk that says the buck stops here. I mean, where does the buck stop here? It certainly is not stopping at the ministers' desks, who are taking no accountability, no responsibility, and can't be found. I mean, maybe we need to put an ankle bracelet on some of these ministers so we know where they are and can try and track them, because where are they? But the buck should stop with the Prime Minister, and he needs to take responsibility for the decisions made by the Community Protection Board that he has set up under this process. And I think we deserve answers about whether he thinks this is right or wrong. He should be getting across what the details here, asking questions. And if a mistake has been made, let's make changes and make sure it doesn't happen again. Because right now, what has happened, of course, over the past few months has been a shambles, as you have said. And the Prime Minister doesn't seem to have any idea about how to fix it.
No, absolutely not. I mean, that picture of that poor grandmother is just heartbreaking every time you see it. Look, we're almost out of time, but I just want to get you both commenting on this story. The number of school students identifying as neither male nor female is now 20 times higher than before the pandemic. That's according to data released by the Australian Curriculum Assessment and Reporting Authority. There were at least 2,500 school students who enrolled as non-binary last year. Basil, this is interesting because not all schools participated, so this is actually probably a smaller figure than in reality. What's going on here?
Well, I think the environment has been created where people feel like there are now alternative answers that they can give, whether or not they are genuinely challenged by that question. And so it's impossible not to think that that number is inflated simply because of the environment that now exists, where that style of thinking is okay. There will be some kids who just don't know. I accept that. I get it. They're confused. They don't know. But that many? I doubt it. And that's the environment that's been created.
Yeah, it's a huge number. Basil Zemplis, Matt Canavan, unfortunately, we've run out of time. Thank you so much for joining us this evening. And as I just mentioned before, a former immigration detainee has faced a Perth court this afternoon, charged with breaching his visa conditions. Crystal Wu is in Perth for us this evening. She joins us now live. Crystal, what's the latest with this story?
Well, Danica, we know a 42-year-old Burundi-born man was arrested yesterday and appeared in court today. He didn't apply for bail, so he's been remanded in custody until he next reappears in court in a couple of weeks' time. Now, the Australian Federal Police arrested him yesterday and charged him with 6 offences under the Commonwealth Migration Act. That includes 5 counts of failing to comply with curfew laws and 1 count of failing to keep a monitoring device in working order. Now, we don't know if he was tampering with that device or not, but we do know that between the dates of April 26 and May the 1st, the ankle monitor was inactive. And if he is found guilty, he faces a maximum penalty of 5 years in jail and up to a fine of $94,000. Now, Premier Roger Cook yesterday said the 20 former immigration detainees based here in WA, only half of them are wearing ankle monitoring bracelets. And of course, as you mentioned before, Danica, just on Sunday, another former immigration detainee was arrested and appeared in court the next day over allegations he was involved in a brutal home invasion that left Girraween grandmother Nanette Simons feel unsafe in her own home. This man who appeared in court today, he is due to reappear at Perth's Central Law Courts via video link on May 16. Danica.
Okay. All right, Crystal, it's just shocking. Crystal Wu, thank you so much for joining us. Well, stay with us. Coming up after the break, tensions rise as pro-Palestinian encampments spread to at least 8 Australian universities. And the Premier promises Queenslanders won't pay a cent for power bills in July. So who will foot the bill? Well, I spoke earlier about the chaotic scenes in the US where over 100 students were arrested after an army of police officers entered Columbia University to round up protesters. The unrest has swept through universities around the world like wildfire, with many student protesters erecting tent encampments on campuses, including, as we've seen here in Australia. Now, as it stands, camps have been set up at Sydney University, Australian National University, the University of Melbourne, Monash, the University of Queensland, Adelaide, as well as Curtin University in Perth, with even more planned. And it's not just camps being set up. Police are investigating unlawful conduct at Sydney University after protesters entered buildings and harassed staff. The ANU is investigating students who allegedly used the Nazi salute, some even declaring their unconditional support for Hamas. And the University of Queensland, a terrorist flag was seen flying on campus there amid the protests. Joining me now is Executive Council of Australian Jury co-CEO Alex Rivchin. Alex, thank you so much for joining us this evening. How do you feel to hear that there are investigations into an alleged Nazi salute while 2 students have pledged their allegiance to Hamas? How does that make you feel?
Well, not great, but at the same time, I'm hardly surprised because for a long time we've known what the pro-Palestinian movement is about. It's not about peace. It's not about justice. It's not even about Palestinians. It's about the destruction of the state of Israel. It adheres to a deeply anti-Western, anti-liberal mindset. And as time has gone on, chants of ceasefire have been replaced with chants for an intifada, which is a reference to suicide bombings, murdering hundreds and hundreds of Israeli civilians. Chants from the river to the sea, which are calls for the destruction of the state of Israel. Now, as you reported, we're seeing Nazi salutes. We're seeing open support for Hamas and other listed terrorist organizations. This is what these people are. And if they're not restrained, if they're not taken seriously as a threat, things will very quickly spiral out of control and we'll see the same horrific scenes we're seeing in the United States.
Well, this is the thing. I mean, we're all for freedom of speech here, but why aren't university officials trying to stop this? What do you make of the argument that, quote, this is just who we are?
I think the university administration certainly don't want this, but I think they're concerned about escalating things through their intervention. I believe there's a hope that things will kind of fizzle out, that they'll run out of steam, that they'll move on to the next fashionable cause. But as we've seen in the US, these anti-liberal, anti-Western forces view this as their moment. They view this as their opportunity to wreak havoc, disorder, paralysis on university campuses, to engage the police. This is what they want. And activists here in Australia are looking very closely at scenes in the US, and they want to bring the same hatred, the same division, the same anarchy to our shores.
Well, we've actually got some live vision coming into us in Los Angeles, the scenes at UCLA, where you can see right now things are getting very tense here, Alex. You've got riot police. They're standing arm in arm. They're going head to head with these protesters. Now, already last night we saw terrifying scenes. There were fist fights. There were shoving, kicking. They were using sticks to beat one another. And it looks like a number of arrests are being made right now. This is live vision coming into us. What do you make of the vision we're seeing right now? And police are moving in there. Are you worried that scenes could spiral out of control here in Australia as they clearly are overseas?
I'm deeply worried because the movement to oppose Israel, to support the Palestinian cause, as we've very clearly seen, it's inherently violent. It's not about peace, it's about destruction. It's about religious supremacism, racial hatred, anarchy, and all of these themes are starting to play out on US campuses and indeed here as well. So unless they're restrained, unless severe action is taken, things will only get worse. And when I think it's easy to dismiss a lot of these protesters as being naive, as being, ignorant kids or students or whatnot. But when you actually think about what they're supporting, what they're endorsing, I mean, the students at ANU who said that they unconditionally support Hamas, we have seen the footage of what Hamas perpetrated on the people of Israel against innocent civilians, dragging young girls by their hair to be raped and enslaved, murdering children, women, holding hundreds of people in a depraved captivity. And the fact that people are looking at that with admiration, with support, knowingly, it says something about our education system, about the families from which they come, and about our society as a whole. We can't allow this to become the norm. We can't allow this sort of extremism and hatred and violence to become normalised.
And we've just seen these pictures here. It is looking like it's sparking up at the university at UCLA. You can see the riot police are telling people to get back. This is clearly not a safe zone right now as they enter the campus. Alex, how would Jewish students be feeling? This is very confronting vision. I mean, people go there to learn. They go there for their education. They have a right to their education. And this is what they're being confronted with. How would the Jewish students be feeling?
Well, for months before these scenes, Jewish students on Australian campuses have been telling us that they feel marginalised, they feel intimidated, they feel harassed. We've seen scenes at the University of Melbourne where anti-Israel activists walked into lecture halls and demanded to know who supports Israel and began photographing those students. We've seen at the University of Sydney young children being coached to chant in support of Intifada and that Israel's a terrorist state. The breeding of hatred from such a young age is an appalling thing. So Jewish students are already feeling unease. They're feeling that they have to hide their Jewishness, take off their yarmulkes, hide their Stars of David, which in Australia in this time should not be happening. And the scenes that we've seen on Australian campuses in the US, this gross escalation of tension, the provocations of support of terrorism, violence, harassment, it's only going to make things far worse.
Yeah, and I think we just saw there as well some flares being thrown around, some flares being set off there in Los Angeles. It does appear that a number of people have been arrested. It's about 3:30 in the morning there in LA. These protesters are going head-to-head with riot police once again. Alex, why are governments around the world not condemning this violence? I mean, here in Australia, there seems to have been a real silence from government. It started on October 9, of course, outside the steps of the Sydney Opera House. But now, even with these protests, Joe Biden hasn't called it out. Anthony Albanese back home. Why are they silent, do you think?
Joe Biden, for his part, has denounced the scenes, particularly at Columbia University, as support for violent extremism and anti-Semitism. He said those things. Our government in Australia hasn't done that, and we need them to do so. We need them to show that leadership. And it's got to cascade down to the universities, to state ministers, to communities, religious leaders, to families. We need to see this for what it is. This is support of violent extremism. This is an opposition to our basic ethics and values as a liberal democratic society. This is what this is. These people are not interested in peace, in coexistence, in tolerance. And we can hear that from their chants, and we can see it in their actions. And so we need leadership. This is a time for that. It's not a time for mealy-mouthed statements, for equating anti-Semitism with Islamophobia and these sorts of things. It's a time to denounce what is happening on our campuses, on our streets every single day before we lose who we are as a country.
And I have just been told that flares are indeed being set off. There's a lot of chaos at the moment, a lot of swearing, hence why we can't actually play you any of the vision that we're seeing on screen. But you see exactly what police are doing there. They're setting off flares. It's obviously escalating, Alex, to a point tonight where they're having to use all of their ammunition to try and quell these protesters. When does it stop? I mean, these protesters have vowed that they will continue doing this. They're not going to stop. What is it going to take, do you think?
It's going to take strength and certainty of action and unity of purpose. That's what it's going to take. These people go as far as they're allowed to go. And when they are treated as legitimate, when they are placated and negotiated with and encouraged, they just advance further in what they're seeking to achieve. They go further and further in their extremism. And then you see the sort of horrific scenes we're seeing now in the United States that you're projecting. We're seeing soldiers firing upon and trying to restrain their own citizens in this way. It shouldn't happen. It looks like a military scene. So we can't allow anything to come near this on the Australian campus. And the way that we can rein things in and restrain students now is by enforcing our laws, enforcing our policies. As you said, universities are a place, yes, for the exchange of ideas, and peaceful civil protest is a part of that, and that's fine. But encampments, camping on university ground day after day, that's not part of protest. That's not what university spaces or any public space is designated for. So action needs to be taken to bring this nonsense to an end, because if action isn't taken, we're seeing right now what awaits us on our campuses, on our streets.
Absolutely. And I mean, we do not want to see these types of scenes on our own campuses here in Australia. Alex Rivchin, really appreciate your time. Thank you so much for joining us on the show this evening.
Thank you, Danica.
Well, let's move on. We will keep you up to date with those protests, but in the meantime, the Queensland government has pledged to double the power bill rebate to $1,000, meaning most people won't need to pay anything for power in the July quarter. Now, the plan will cost the state $2.5 billion and won't even be means tested. Let's bring in macro business chief economist Leith Van Onselen now. Leith, good to see you as always. This comes just before October's state election. I mean, it smells like desperation to me, but do you think that this is indeed financially responsible?
Look, I do actually, Danica. You might be surprised to hear that. These rebates have been paid for by the 2022 budget decision to basically increase coal royalties. So it's not borrowed money. It's effectively money that's come from the mining sector. And I view it as effectively a dividend back to Queensland households for their mineral wealth, right? So they own the resources. They're basically getting a return on those resources from this record export boom that we've had. Now, the rebate should also be reduce inflation, because previous rounds of energy rebates, the Australian Bureau of Statistics has shown have actually lowered energy prices by about 10%. Those are the energy prices that feed in the CPI. So they will actually help to also lower inflation. So I think it's a tick in two boxes. That being said, it really is a Band-Aid to cover over the really high energy costs that Queenslanders and indeed Australians are experiencing. And what we really need is longer-term energy policy to actually bring down energy prices. And I think what the Queensland government should be doing is copying Western Australia and reserving some of its export gas for domestic use. It should also put price caps on that gas to keep gas and electricity prices lower. And it should also consider imposing higher royalties on the gas sector so that Queensland households receive a bigger return from their mineral wealth, because at the moment they're not earning enough.
Yeah, OK, well, look, that's certainly then positive news. Now, Leith, concerns over another interest rate hike are back, of course, after last week's disappointing inflation data that showed it hadn't declined as much as forecast. But with retail sales also being extremely weak, some, like yourself, don't necessarily think that the RBA's next move is to hit the cash rate button. Why?
Yeah, so you might recall we talked, I think, a week ago, Danica, and all the talk then was about, this higher than expected inflation figure, which could potentially lead to, another rate hike from the RBA. I think this week's retail sales have actually put a dampener on that. Now, retail sales unexpectedly fell by 0.4% in March, and they're up only 0.8% year on year. Now, you might be listening to that thinking, oh, that's still growth. They're actually the weakest annual retail sales since 2000. If outside the pandemic, so that's almost 25 years. And also, once you subtract population growth of about 2.5% and CPI inflation of 3.6%, what it means is that households effectively cut back on their retail spending by about 5% in the year to March. That's a massive cutback. And this decline in expenditure makes sense when you consider the fact that Australian households experienced the biggest decline in household disposable income in the world last year. So they suffered basically a 6% decline in real household disposable income. And what this basically tells you is that household consumption is incredibly weak. That drives about 60% of the economy. And that should be a flashing red light signal to the Reserve Bank that doesn't need to hike rates again, because households are already cutting back hard on expenditure and the economy's in trouble, basically.
Yeah, it certainly seems that way. Leith Van Onselen, great to speak with you as always. Thanks for joining us on the show this evening. Well, stay with us. Still to come, police are still in that standoff with protesters at UCLA in Los Angeles. These are live pictures. Police using their ammunition to try and quell these protesters. We'll bring you the latest on this unfolding situation after the break. Welcome back. Let's go back now to the live pictures coming in from UCLA in Los Angeles, where it's just gone at 3:40 a.m. in the morning and police are still in a standoff with protesters. Let's bring in my panel now as we watch these live pictures. The Australian National Affairs editor Joe Kelly and Sky News commentator Jason Morrison. Jason, police are really working through this very methodically there, but they're certainly trying to quell the scenes. We've seen a number of people arrested. What are you thinking when you see what's going on here?
Well, I'm thinking this kind of image is a few days away in Sydney. Frankly, I walked past the equivalent situation in Sydney University, 2 days ago. And I can tell you, it's nowhere near as big, but it's just as hostile. I heard stories about Jewish kids being hissed at as they walk past on their way to classes. This kind of caper that's going on in UCLA is really no different. And of course, the trouble is that a lot of the people on the other side of the wall there have got almost a Twitter understanding of the Middle East politics. They really don't actually have any grasp as to who they are supporting or what they're supporting by doing all of this. And the very free speech they get to exercise in a country like the United States, or in our case, Australia, is something that they wouldn't experience if they were in the very country that they're demonstrating in support of. It's bizarre.
It really is bizarre. Joe, I mean, we're seeing this play out at campuses across the United States now, and obviously the situation has really spiralled out of control there, as what we're seeing tonight. I mean, these protesters are not going to back down. They've made it very clear. Do you echo Jason's concerns? Are you worried that we could see a similar event occur here in Sydney as well, or other parts of the country?
I absolutely echo those concerns. I think, like in so many other things, America is often an example. In this case, it would be a bad example, but I think the danger is that this is replicated in Australian university campuses. And we already know there's already been studies and surveys showing that a lot of people of the Jewish faith do not feel safe going to university. These should be institutions where there's a free exchange of ideas and free speech is allowed, but people should not feel unsafe on the basis of their race or religion. And I think what is happening is terrible, and a terrible example that I hope is not replicated over here.
Well, we certainly hope not. I mean, you've got people going to universities. They have a right to education. They have a right to learn. And Jason, I was just speaking before to Alex Rivchin of one of our very most prominent Australian Jewish associations here in Australia, and he was telling me that Jewish students are scared. They're scared to go. They're scared to learn. And when you see scenes like this, you don't blame them. This is an intimidating scene that no student should be subjected to.
Yeah, look, I mean, the difference between what you're seeing on the telly now in California versus what's happening in, say, Sydney University tonight is the police aren't there yet. It'll happen because it has to happen because of exactly this problem. The kids are frightened. I call them kids. They're young adults. They're frightened to be in the campus, and could you blame them? You cross the bridge, and people who know Sydney University will know that there's this tremendous bridge structure that goes under one of the main roads that links the two campuses together, and you're almost walking over swastikas. I mean, it is that ridiculous. The anti-Jewish propaganda, and I'll call it that is on the poles here, there and everywhere, it's abhorrent. And yet, what's the university doing? I mean, they like to kind of dance around and say, oh, this is all about free speech. A very fine line at the moment at some of these universities between what's free speech and what's hate speech. And when you start seeing swastikas and you start seeing comic-style representations of what Jewish people are like, and octopuses and things like that, you start actually realising that this has gone well past past the point of free speech and political expression. I don't mind people having a say on issues like Middle Eastern politics. You can say as much as you like it'll make one crap a difference in Australia what you have to say. But anyway, they go on and do and say as they wish. But to take it to the point where you're intimidating kids, and this thing looks pretty frightening in UCLA. As I say, we're a few days away from this at Australian universities. You watch.
Well, look, I mean, fingers crossed it doesn't get to that, but certainly police are really confronting the protesters this evening. We will bring our viewers back to that throughout the evening, but I want to move on now to the rest of the day's news with both of you. Let's begin with female MPs who have lashed the Labor government's weak stance on domestic violence, as they're saying. Now, Zali Steggall slammed Albanese's $925 million investment on Sky earlier today.
Let's peel back, I think, the marketing spin that came out of the announcement from the National Cabinet and the Prime Minister, and let's look at what it really is. So they've announced a number over 5 years because it sounds bigger. At the end of the day, it's $185 million per year. Now, let's get real. That does not go a long way.
Joe, do you think that this announcement goes far enough to tackle the issues we're seeing right now?
Well, I don't, but that's because I think Anthony Albanese deliberately, as a political strategy, really built this issue up. And he did that when Scott Morrison was Prime Minister, and that served his political interest at the time. I'd add, obviously, that I think having safe communities, people feeling safe out and about at their job, in their homes, is very important. There's a problem if that starts to change. But I think the issue for Anthony Albanese is that he's made the politics around this more difficult for himself. And we've seen the position of the Labor government, which is that it wants to eliminate violence against women and children within a generation. Now, that's a very difficult feat to accomplish, and you have to ask whether anything that came out of that crisis National Cabinet meeting the other day will achieve that. And I think most people would say they wouldn't. And I think what's happening is people are getting a bit sick and tired of these issues of important national issues of domestic violence and treatment of women being used as an exercise in gesture politics or virtue signalling. And I think what we're finding out now is that the Albanese government has discovered that. So I think it's created a rod for its own back.
Yeah, a fair call. I absolutely agree with you. Now, we don't have much time left, but the Energy Minister, Chris Bowen, is under pressure to secure new gas investment after he admitted that more supply would be needed to power Australia. Jason, I mean, Chris Bowen seems to be really overseeing an energy disaster in this country. Do you agree?
Yeah, we're playing, Mr. Magoo Lotto here. We're pulling an idea out of the machine and going, yeah, let's do that. We'll get more gas out. This bloke can't figure out what he's about. He's an embarrassment is what he's about. Never made a product or service anyone's ever wanted, never done a thing with his life that anyone's ever welcomed. But now he's screwing up our lives by increasing our energy costs. And just when he realises he's buggered up one end of it, he goes and tries to get involved in the next. Bowen is a joke. Bowen is going to cost Albanese power, and I'm stunned that he doesn't see that. And, it's all well and good to get sidetracked into the weekly issue, and unfortunately, I don't want to trivialise it, but this week's weekly issue is the domestic violence response from government. Last week it was about getting Elon Musk and whatever else. What about reducing people's power bills? And Bowen, his new fix to this is to reverse something that he caused in the first place. The bloke is so laughable and so unbelievable, I don't know why they even pay attention to him.
Yeah, well said. Jason Morrison, Joe Kelly, we've got to leave it there. Thanks to both of you for your time this evening. And stay with us. Coming up after the break, we'll go live to London for the latest on the royals as we get an update on Princess Catherine's health. That's next. Welcome back. Well, Prince William has given an update on the health of Princess Kate, saying she's doing well when asked how his wife and children were during the opening of a charity centre in England. Meanwhile, their daughter, Princess Charlotte, is today celebrating her 9th birthday with the royals, sharing this sweet image of her. And joining me now for the latest is ITV News Royal editor Chris Shipp. Chris, let's start with the health of the princess. She's, of course, undergoing treatment for cancer, and obviously people are wondering how she's going. What's the latest? What did Prince William say?
Well, of course, every time Prince William does a public visit now, people are listening really, really carefully to see what he says about Kate. He's told us that she's doing well, but of course, we haven't seen her since that video she released before Easter when she broke that news that she was not only had cancer, but that she was having what she called preventative chemotherapy. So every time William goes out, people want to know, hey, how is she? What's she doing? And at least we've had that little tiny bit of information from him that she's doing well. But clearly the focus of both of them today is going to be, as you've just been saying, on Princess Charlotte, who's having her 9th birthday, and a new picture taken by Kate, we're told, in the last couple of days in Windsor. And they released that just in the last hour or so.
Yes, can you believe that she is now 9 years old? It's just incredible, and it's a beautiful picture released by the palace there. Now, I want to ask you about King Charles, because he's actually met with cancer patients to mark his official return to public duties. Now, one patient said the monarch actually spoke about the shock of being diagnosed. I've got to say, Chris, it's really great to see him out and about again.
Do you know what? I was at the hospital just a couple of days ago with King Charles, and what struck me was a connection that he clearly had with the cancer patients. So remember, this is the first time his own doctors have allowed him to go back out to work in the public domain. He's, of course, done all that kind of official stuff behind the scenes. But this is his first public visit. He chose a cancer centre. And it was really clear to me, just by the way he kind of held their hands really tightly and wished them luck. And just as much as he was asking them how they are, they were asking him how he is as well. And he spoke about the shock of being given a cancer diagnosis, the one he got earlier this year. And, you know, when asked how he was, he said, I'm doing all right, thank you. But I think he was really moved. And also the patients I spoke to afterwards who met him, they were really moved by that visit, and that he was able to come and see them, and chose a cancer centre as his first return to public engagements. But remember, the King still has cancer himself and is still getting treatment for cancer.
Yes, he is, but certainly it was great to see him looking quite well, I've got to say, under the circumstances. Now, Chris, despite early signs seeming to point to a family reunion, there are now reports that King Charles may be too busy to catch up with Prince Harry upon his return to London, of course, for the Invictus Games. Now, I mean, the King apparently has a rather full-on schedule, but do you think that this is deliberate to perhaps avoid his wayward son?
Look, I think that Prince Harry coming over, his father's got cancer. At some point, they're going to find a gap in the King's schedule. If you remember, just after the King announced he had cancer, Harry flew over from California. He saw him. It wasn't for very long, but, you know, then again, the King was off to Sandringham or something. He delayed his plans in order to see Harry. Of course, the one person Harry didn't see then when he came over was Prince William, and that tells you everything you need to know about the discord in that relationship between the two brothers. I suspect next week when Harry comes here, and must point out without Meghan, she's not going to this service at St Paul's Cathedral to mark the 10-year anniversary of the Invictus Games. But I think when he comes, he will probably see his dad. The bigger question really is whether or not he'll be able to see his brother, Prince William, and sister-in-law Kate, particularly given the news we were just talking about Kate having cancer. But Meghan is joining Meghan is joining Harry in Nigeria straight afterwards for another Invictus Games related visit. Interesting that she's not able to do the London visit, but is doing the Nigeria visit. And perhaps that tells you something about Meghan's relationship with the UK, still very much under strain after her exit from the royal family.
Yeah, it certainly appears that way. Chris Shipp, great to speak with you. Thank you so much for joining us on the show this evening. And before we let you go, well, let's go back now to those live pictures you can see on your screen coming to us from UCLA in Los Angeles. As police are still clashing with protesters, it's just about to go 4 a.m. in the morning. This has been going on all night. We've seen a lot of lights flashing. It does look quite chaotic. We've also seen some people arrested, but we'll have the latest on that throughout the evening. And that is all we have got time for tonight. Stay tuned because Paul Murray is up next. Thanks for your company.